Hello, everyone. Happy Friday, and welcome to another episode of What is School For? And on this show, I interview leading educators, entrepreneurs, business owners, and parents, students, traditional, non-traditional, homeschoolers, unschoolers, and they come here to discuss, debate, and disrupt education. And the goal is to future-proof the next generation. And today we are talking about reimagining and disrupting education with an amazing disruptor in education. And so join us live is the one and only Peter Hostrawser. And Peter and I recently connected through some other amazing disruptors in education. And Peter spent almost 2 decades, right, in education, and is a speaker, a founder. He has his own podcast called Disrupt Education. So as soon as I saw that title, I was like, yes, I love this guy already. I need to get Peter on this show to talk about ways that we can really improve our century-old education system to really help our students become the best versions of who they are to make a positive contribution to our society. So I'm really excited, and thank you so much for joining us live. We are live on LinkedIn. We are live on Facebook, on Periscope, and on YouTube. I see my friend Lance from Australia. Thank you for joining us live. So let me know in the comment section where you guys are joining us live from, social media-wise and geographically speaking. And Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I am humbled, very humbled.
Truly, it's my honor. So I want to ask you, as I introduced my show earlier, what is school for? This show is actually inspired by my interview with Seth Godin. And so we discuss, debate, and disrupt education. You also have a really popular podcast called Disrupt Education. So I want to ask you, what inspired you to become a disruptor in education? And what inspired you to launch your own podcast focusing on disrupting education?
That's a great question. Really just being frustrated as an educator. I mean, we're both educators, and we learned inside this box. And, over my 20 years, this happened about 5 or 6 years ago, where I would just see students walking through our halls. Now, I'm a secondary educator in the United States, so high school, 9 through 12 is our grades. And it's just, frustrating seeing kids walk through a place where you're opening doors and they're just not getting it. And so what I started doing is I just started learning from kids. My first couple of podcasts go way back in maybe 2-3 years ago. I just started interviewing students. What would you do differently in education? And learn how to become a podcaster doing that. And right now, I believe I'm on 134 podcasts right now. Learned a lot through that. So that was kind of the trigger point of, okay, this kid has so much to offer, but they're just not doing it inside this box. So that's what
I interrupt you for a second. This is great. So you actually interviewed students.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. My first podcasts are all students.
Wow, I can't wait to check it out. Yeah. I would love to get some of your students on my show. So share with us, what are some key takeaways you learned from those students that you interviewed?
Well, I think the number one thing is the biggest thing that's going on right now is social emotional learning. And that's like the tagline for everything. Number one is understand. I was just talking to a student before this. I meet with a junior in high school, and I'm kind of mentoring him. And he said it perfectly. He was like, the best teachers are the one who actually learn from and with their students. And that's the biggest thing that I've learned from everything, the educators, the college students, is just understanding who your client is, right? I'm a business educator. So, who are they and what do they bring to the table rather than, did you check this box? So I think that's the biggest thing through all of these. They all have a different path. They all have a different lens. And man, I just feel humbled to sit and listen and to hear their stories. And then I always ask the question, how would you change education, or how are you changing education? Because there are already some people moving and shaking in it. So So yeah, that's it. That's the biggest thing.
Oh, that's such a great question. I would love to. We have quite a few people joining us live right now. And I would love to ask, actually, we have quite a few students joining us live from California. So I would love to ask you guys, how would you like to reimagine, redesign education? And so based on what you said, Peter, reminds me, I recently had the great honor to interview Esther Wojcicki. I don't know if you know her. And she's known as the godmother of Silicon Valley, the mom of the CEO of YouTube and 23andMe, and the doctor. So she said the same thing, like the sage on the stage model is over. So she developed this new term, which is guide on the side, as opposed to sage on the stage. So as you were talking about, learning with the students, and reminds me of what she shared with me. And so like, this is a great transition. So you have been in education for a few decades. That's so impressive. So what do you think are some really old and outdated practices that need to be like game over? Yeah.
Wow, there's so many. I'm a huge Sir Ken Robinson fan. So, you change in the system, you change outside the system, you tear it down and rebuild it. And I've seen actually all three models. So, there's so many outdated pieces. I am not a huge fan of the bell system. I mean, it's just like Pavlov's dogs running around school. And I think there needs to be more student choice and guidance. I totally agree with your guest. I think there needs to be exposure to communities, and rather than we in the United States, we put school here and then we put communities over here. I think we're just so focused on too much curriculum rather than what is the potential of each kid. And, I think some of the things that are done are, the repetitive, like you said, we are in still a system where we stand up there and we're like, okay, I have all the answers, do what I say, rather than, hey, bring things to the table and let's just get messy. Failure is okay. We need to make failure okay in schools. I think that's the biggest thing. I think the notion of people being afraid to fail and the high score is what the student said to me before. Everybody focuses on the grade and the high score is then they get done with playing the game. And I think after, your couple years, you're 6, 7, 10 years into this game, if you will, you get bored. I mean, we see the levels of engagement fall off. So, I can't really say there's one piece of the entire system that we should remove because it works for some people, but I think we need to identify where it works for people. And then I always say the thirds. I don't have this like calculated somewhere, but maybe about 20% of kids that works for school. And then, you have about 30% that people can play the game. And then you have another 30, 40% that are like, this game is not for me. So I think we need to just change different things in there.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I love it. And I love this, really spot on. I agree. You and I, before we went live, we were talking about, I don't know if you feel comfortable sharing, but I can share my own children. This is my 8 years old. When he was 7 last year, he's actually in the live audience. He can share. Ada, you can talk about your experience. And he hated school, like so bored. But now after we homeschool him for quite some time, he's like a different person, right? Yeah. Like now he loves learning. Like it is so exciting to see the spark in children's eyes. Yeah. And one activity I really enjoy doing. By the way, you mentioned Sir Ken Robinson. Yeah. I love his TED Talk. I'm a huge fan of him as well. And I'm actually revisiting his book and Reimagining Education or something. I forgot the title, but I'm actually listening to the book. So like one favorite activity I enjoy doing is like if you just like Google and like if you just Google school makes me, and I just do this all the time. And look at this. This is what I got. Last time I did this, there was actually one term that was last time there was one term positive was December 2019. I think there was like a happy at the end. But this time I Google, look, right, nothing. And it's really, really sad to see how much stress, you were talking about grades. I agree. And like give students so much anxiety, so much stress in that environment, of course, they are not thinking about innovation, things like that. And given that you are a disruptor yourself, so here is a great question, which is similar to one of the questions that I have for you. So like, how should we teach, right? So the stage on the stage model doesn't work. And now we're kind of talking about the old like grading and labeling our students. They don't work. So what works and what should we do?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Thank you so much for that question. I think in our education system, and I'm specifically talking about the United States here. I know we're on an international platform, but I think one of the things we do is just find if you don't fit in the box, then we try to fit you in the box. And I think that's just such a negative way. I think that's why we're seeing all those when you Google that. I feel like a good way is to, as educators, and again, I'm talking secondary education and beyond, is to really understand the student, understand what they're good at, and just go at that. Just build upon that, and you'll add the math, the science, the history, all these different things into that, but build on their strengths, because what we do is we find out what they're weak at, and then we try to fix it. And of course, you're going to see all these things come through. You're going to see people coming in, I'm stressed, they're telling me I'm not good at this subject or that subject, or I can't do, this piece of the homework right. Well, what can people do right? And then we need to teach teamwork. I think actually attaching schools to their communities a lot more is, we have so much in our communities. We have places where we can pull a lot of resources, and maybe we don't have the funding to do things in a community. Well, guess what? Why can't we put students in there and have them actually build around their community? One of the models that I love is called Iowa Big, and a shout out to Trace Pickering, who's a co-founder of that in Iowa, where they basically took a school, and half the day the kids go there and they work on projects, and they have one teacher from each piece of the curriculum actually making sure they're hitting pieces of whatever the state standards are. And those students are doing things, and it's not the grade, it's actually where they started, and the students actually see something that they've done, usually for somebody else or a community or a team of people or a business. That's the actual piece that they are working for, rather than a letter that really is just kind of up here in the air.
Yeah. I love that. And I think there's so much that our communities can offer, right? That's why, for me, I have this notion, classroom without walls. Really, the best education happens outside the classroom. In real life, right? We need to push our students and to have more real life exposure. I don't know about you, Peter. For me, and in the classroom for so many years, and some of the questions I heard a lot from my students, including, Dr. I, will this be on the exam? Or, hey, Dr. I don't know. Like, you teach me, what do you want? Tell me what you want. And so I don't know, do you hear answers like questions like that or comments like that a lot in your classes? So how do you help your students kind of cultivate that self-awareness? And I know that they are in the traditional system for so long, and we kind of killed that agency. So how do you reignite their passion for learning and their interest in understanding who they are? Pam talks a lot about that sense of purpose, like meaning. So what do you do to help them become alive again?
Yeah, there's a lot of unlearning. It's very difficult. I've had students who are like, I don't understand what you want. And sometimes my first big, shock to them is, I want you to give me $500 or something like that, right? Like, just give me money. And then they're like, well, I'm not going to give you any money. Well, if you ask people what they want, that's actually what I want, buy me a Ferrari or something. I don't know. But there's a lot of unlearning. And I think a lot of it is actually when a student fails, you have to kind of go back into where was the point where you were afraid to actually start to do things on your own? And it's different for many students. How are you going to grade this? Well, sometimes I teach kids in some parts of our curriculum, well, I want you to grade yourself. You mean I can just give myself an A? You can. And then they start thinking about those different things. And these are very difficult things to do. And it's very individualistic. But some kids will get it. But a lot of kids, especially, you know, I see a lot of that's what keeps me driven here. I mean, I love to do that, because when I see a student say, you know, what do you want? What do you want me to do? I know that there's a challenge there, and I love a challenge. I lean into challenges. And when you take a student back and say, do this in your way, and then we'll reach back. So that first conversation after they do one little piece of whatever it is, I teach a lot of computer science. So if they do like a homepage for themselves, I do a lot of online portfolios, and they create that homepage, that first interaction, when they do something, it's not going to be perfect what they do, but you have to walk them through and say, okay, this is great. There's a spelling error there, but that's great. Let me tell you a story about me or who else did that. And now they've excelled. So you make them comfortable with failing. And we just don't do that. I think we just set these, okay, you need to get to the A, and then that's it. And then we move on. That's really how I do it.
I love that example, how you also makes yourself, you know, as the teacher, be vulnerable. Like if we ask our students to embrace failures and mistakes, and how can we show up as the sage, you know, this like amazing robot who never makes a mistake, right? We have to show up as human beings, saying things like, oh, I made a mistake. Let's figure this out. I don't know about this. Can we work on this together? So I love that. Great example. So here, and I see that we have quite a few questions from our live audience, and so I'm trying to catch up, everyone. Okay, we have lots of comments.
Great question.
So here's kind of Ashley. I don't know if we kind of answer that. You know, talking about motivation, what you mentioned is like really keep that learning personal and start with the students. And so here is another one from Pam. I think you were talking about. Pam is a great educator. I love her. Definitely check out her blog articles. And so when we are talking about, you know, individual achievement, and we keep students only focused on, you know, themselves and not on what they can contribute to the greater society. So how can we change that? Oh, I love this question. You know, moving beyond my GPA, I think that's what students get from taking exams, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, like Sir Ken Robbins said that, you know, the traditional exam, you know, if you are working with another, that's like cheating. But outside of the school environment, we call that collaboration. So really interesting. So share how do you answer that question?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And again, I was actually just conversating with a young man that I speak with on a weekly basis, and he's a poet. And he just writes poetry actually around like how he's frustrated. Everything you listed on that Google, I love that Google lookup, because everything you listed there is school makes me this or school makes me that. He actually does poetry on that. And so we've challenged each other. We're like, okay, so I've never published a book. Thank you for having the 15-year-old last week on Friday. Oh my gosh, that kid was amazing, by the way. So I felt like, man, I should probably publish one. There's a 15-year-old who's published 13 books out there. And I'm speaking of last Friday. But what I talked to him about is like, look, you have a gift here to do some poetry. And what I'm going to challenge you to do is, he's at about 38, 39 pieces, and he wants to get to 100 and then publish a book. And I'm like, okay, this is your learning. This is how he's attaching what he is doing right now. I think one of the key things that I have to tell people, or we need to tell ourselves, is this isn't going to be forever. You may not be a poet forever. Big deal. You know, just have fun with it. Lean into the journey right now. And so what I asked him is like, okay, so once we get to 100, let's start right now. Let's start looking at books out there, poetry books. Just Google them, see what's out there, see what kind of style you like. And then I'm going to guarantee you that somebody is going to take a look at this book and they're going to say, this is speaking to me. So that's how they start helping that out. And what we're doing right here, the social media, the interaction, we are teaching youth I love to teach youth how to use social media and not be used by it. Right? Yes, let's do that. Because one of the things we don't do, especially in high school, is we shut it down. We're afraid of it.
Oh my God.
And I feel like I get it. I get that there are dangers. I get it, right? But if we were afraid of everything, we wouldn't do anything, right? So I'm a huge proponent of pushing on how to get students to actually use social media. The world is at your fingertips. I mean, I am blessed here to speak with people all over the world. I mean, Australia, thank you, popped up first here, and now more connections. We got connected through a young man, through a group that I think we're all going to be on a chat tomorrow with. Really where these information, and that's I think how people can give back to the world, because outside of these little boxes. But I really like the way that students can actually we have to change our mindset. We have to change our mindset as adults. This crew coming through now, people are like, oh, they're in this COVID, they're falling behind. I don't think so. I think this next generation is going to be stronger than ever, because they are actually going through this and they're seeing what it's like, and they're seeing what is good and what is actually not working in education, and it's amplified. And I think that, even with the social injustices going on all across the world, the Black Lives Matter, there's a generation here that is making change for the better. And that, to me, I get goosebumps talking about it, because I am privileged to actually be a person who gets to interact and teach with these youth. And it's amazing. So, yeah.
Oh my God, I'm so with you. And this is something that I always say, social media is not the root of the problem, but how we are using it is very problematic. And we're not teaching the how part. I have worked with so many schools, especially in the K-12 space, just like what you mentioned, Peter, they ban. I was like, oh no. And even like just this morning, I had a conversation with some trainers in Singapore who is going to speak at my program, but they were talking about how students in Singapore are talking about Black Lives Matters and creating their own stories using social media and technology. I was like, wow, that is so amazing. So I'm really excited that we are on the same page regarding this, because I think it's really powerful, just because we are banning this, we're not educating our children to see the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? You have to show them everything so they can practice their own critical thinking and making their own judgment. So I love that. I love that. I would love to hear some examples. I know even your own children, you talked about it, doing videos, this and that. So give us some examples of how you are actually incorporating social media and technology into your own home education with your children and in the classroom to help students develop some of those really important 21st century skills and becoming responsible global citizens.
Yes. It's leaning in and not like just shutting it down. Because, like when we were kids, somebody said you can't do that. What was the first thing you wanted to do it? You're like, I want to go into it. So, one of the things that my daughter has about 3 or 4 different YouTube channels, right? And she's 12 years old. And some of them work, some of them she's like, I don't really like it, or she gets embarrassed, or, and we've had the conversation. Some people aren't going to like what you put out there, or there's going to be mean people, or there's going to be positive people. This is a great practice. When we sit down and she does these videos, she did some stop motion things with her iPad. And it's just experimenting. And, I'm like, if you don't want to publish it, don't publish it. But I'm going to encourage you to publish something that's kind of cool and just see what happens, right? We can block people. We can do that. I'm here for you, and walking them through that. And understanding that this is more than just a platform of likes and I get followers and stuff. I'd rather have 100 followers that I interact with than 5 million followers that nobody says anything. And I have those conversations with my kids as well as the students in school. My son actually started, he wanted to 3D print. And I think where education comes in is where when you walk into a place, what I did is I opened a door for my son, right? We found out that there was a 3D printing thing that was happening at our local library. And it was in the evening, and I'm like, okay, well, they have a 3D printer, and it's like very cheap to 3D print on this thing. I don't need to buy one or anything like that. And he's taught himself how to build a computer. As a matter of fact, my desktop, my son has built for me. And we took him to this 3D printing thing. And when I walked in, I saw there were 4 old men, right? And these guys were like in their 60s. And I was like, oh no, here's my son. He's all anxious, 3D printing, and he probably has something in his mind. And he's like, he's not going to be, quote unquote, entertained by this. As we were sitting through, it was just an hour thing. And some of these guys were engineers, brilliant engineers in the room. I'm like, you're learning from the best. And, as me, I modeled. I sat there and I listened. And this was when he was 12 or 13 years old. And then one of the guys had a buddy who had an older Bentley. And the Bentley needed a little piece that was behind a reflector that was cracked. And what he did is he showed what happened when he 3D printed this piece and he took it to the Bentley thing, because if he ordered it from Bentley, it would have been like $600-700 for just a small little piece. It's a Bentley, right? So he 3D printed it and took it to the dealership, and the dealership said, we'll just paint it for free. That's really cool if you show us how you did that. As soon as he said car, which my son loves cars and loves like designing cars, and everything he does is around cars. He's learning Photoshop around cars. That was it. And he actually stood up and showed them Tinkercad, which these guys didn't. They were in way bigger, kind of programs, 3D modeling programs. They're like, wow, this is cool. This is like a great beginner program. And he got up and actually on the screen and he taught himself how to 3D print. These are the things I think as a mentor in a classroom that we can do. We can really adjust anything, and we have to find out what drives these students and how they build into it. So for me as a financial literacy educator, I'm like, what do you want to buy? Everybody wants to buy something, and it could be good, it could be bad. It could be like, I want to buy a Ferrari, and you're like, maybe you don't. But then you teach them how much it takes. I speak a lot in cars because that's what my son does, but you teach them how much money it costs per month to actually run this thing, and then you open their eyes to, okay, here's a YouTube channel. I'm going to give a shout out to Hoovie's Garage. I love the guy. He's out in Kansas, and he talks about tearing apart and putting together cars and different things like that. And this is the way I think that I do it with my own kids, and it's social media. They're social media. We do a father-son car chat that we haven't done in a little while, which was a podcast. So my son and I did a podcast, and we learned so much from it. It's like I've learned how to actually, okay, we got to keep the motivation going. I've learned about cars. We're 2 different generations. And we published and we put it out there. We've made an Instagram around it. And is it, I think a lot of students want it to go 0 to 5 million viewers. And in that process of social media, you teach it's a slow roll, man. It takes time to do. So those are a couple of stories.
I love those are really great examples. This shows, I use a very similar approach. My son, he's into selling stuff. He's into drawing. So we have designed so many different projects based on his interest, and he loves it. Yeah. And reminds me, Bloom Taxonomy in education is one of my really personal favorite framework. The lowest level of learning is memorization, right? Regurgitating information. And the highest level, higher cognitive development is to create. So I think if we can really help our children figure out ways to create, and social media, 3D printing, creating a podcast, whatever they're into. And that is a great way for them to not only learn something, but also develop really, really important skills. So I love those examples. And when children are working on things that they are passionate about, they are having so much fun, right? Yeah.
But I really encourage them to document it too. Just document it. I know that's a struggle. People don't want to say, I know this, or there's a lot of social anxiety around that. But documenting it is so, so important. Whether you do that on an Instagram, whether you do that I'm a huge platform kind of person where you can put your resume or your portfolio out there. Yes. I'm going to shout out to crash.co. A buddy of mine, Isaac Morehouse, started that, but I know there's plenty of them out there. Even just on a Weebly or Wix. LinkedIn is huge. I kind of push my older students towards that and say, okay, just start putting these things out here, right? Like here is a perfect example of us, doing this conversation where they can actually connect and ask questions and just not be afraid of it. I am huge on portfolio. I think every student, when they walk out of a high school, should have a portfolio, an online portfolio, showing some sort of journey in however, whatever terms or whatever way they want to say it. So yeah, I think that's very important.
I so great, right? Like LinkedIn, like I'm also pushing like students to have some sort of presence on LinkedIn, because like data has shown that when companies are making hiring decisions, they are actually using social media to screen the candidates. And guess what? LinkedIn is their favorite platform, and such a great way. Yeah, I love how LinkedIn has that feature, so you can filter your resume, as you mentioned, digital portfolio, and this speaks volumes of who you are, what you do, than the traditional. I think the traditional resume is game over. That's what I think.
Yeah.
And but like show me economy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So here's a question from Trisha, who is an amazing 15-year-old entrepreneur.
Yes. This is a young man. I have to next Friday. Oh my gosh! Thank you for the question.
So, so for people who are kind of, like at least many parents I talk to, many school teachers I work with, they're like, I'm not sure about social media. So what do you do to help them kind of ease into using social media the way that we are talking about social media right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what platform they're interested in or they're good with, and just to just kind of experiment with. TikTok is out there. I know a lot of creatives that are playing around with TikTok. I know Instagram. I just first off, ask the kids, how are you communicating with everybody? It used to be Snapchat. I'm trying to keep up myself. Twitch is huge now. Things go along. And that's the first thing. How are you communicating with people? And then how can you actually learn from that one, right? And then let's have conversations to go into, what connecting with point A to point B. But now, okay, how can you actually help somebody on that platform, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those steps, the first one is where they're comfortable being. Here's the cool part about this, and this is where, as an educator in a system where I get to do is when students say TikTok, they're like, I'm like, what is that, right? And this was a couple of years back. And I listen to Gary Vaynerchuk and Eric Thomas, and those guys get me going. But they talk about these platforms. And I actually love to listen to, 14, 15-year-olds, because that's where the next platform is going to come. There's going to be stability ones like, Twitter and LinkedIn right here. But where are these things going? And so that's kind of where I ease in. I learn with them. That is so, so important. I can't tell you enough how many, the difference between a good teacher and a bad teacher is the first step. And I know there's a bunch of layers to that and everybody argues about it, but if you can't learn with your students, then you're not a good teacher. You have to learn with your students. So on that platform, my own students, my own kids, I ask, what are you on? There's a trust factor there, right? You have to build trust. You have to say, because the first time you ask a student, what kind of social media you're on, they're like, nothing. They don't want to tell you because they might be scared that they're doing something wrong. Can you teach me how to use that? Those, it's just the way that you kind of ask the questions with not only your own kids, but show me what you're doing there. That's kind of cool. I'm not just saying this because I'm your dad, or I'm not just saying this because I'm an educator or whatever. So those relationships is the way you do it. So that's a great question. And there isn't really one platform. And as a matter of fact, these platforms are going to continue to grow and some of them are going to die. And I think that's just the cycle of social media now.
And because they come and go, I think that is a great way to learn and unlearn and relearn, right? You agree with me, and everyone here, that social media, at least, they change. LinkedIn, all the platforms that I use, they change on a regular basis. Yeah. So you have to be constantly learning, unlearning, and relearning. So I love, we're training them, teaching them how to fish, so that when there's a new platform, they can just jump into it and play with it. Yeah. I also love how you mentioned, I think that's a key message of how parents and teachers should show up in the 21st century as a guide, as a facilitator, learn with our children, learn with our students, not as this dictator, right? because I said so, but show up as a facilitator. So I wonder if you can share some tips, because I read one of your blog articles. You were talking about like the way that we're hiring our teachers is like really outdated. That needs to be like disrupted. And so I wonder if you can explain that, why do you think the way that we're hiring and evaluating teachers is outdated, and what should be a better way, and how teachers should, show up and be selected in this new digital environment?
Yeah, that's a great point. I remember my first year when I started teaching. I was in Elkhart, Indiana, and I came out. I didn't go right into education, right? So I was a broadcast journalism major. And so I kind of bounced around, became a bartender, did all these different things. And then I got into becoming an entrepreneur, did some video work way back in the SVHS beta days. And then, I actually saw a point where my wife said, wife now, who we were dating at the time, was elementary school. They're like, hey, we're doing video announcements and we want to build a video announcer. We got, excuse me, a little bit of a grant, and to have these students actually videotape themselves. And then we were going to put the VHS tape in and show announcements all week. I got a couple of kids who were like great, quote unquote, academic kids. And these were 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. And then I got a couple that were like, just get this kid out of my class, right? And everybody moved forward. Even the kids who weren't that well, quote unquote, behaved, or, school wasn't really working for them. They went back and their teachers were like, so-and-so is doing better in math, so-and-so is doing better in English and whatnot, because they're actually working with something hands-on, right? So my point is, when you go into becoming an educator, what I had was a big, huge binder with 30 different papers and all the different things that I printed out. And again, this was late 90s, early 2000s. But now I believe everybody needs to have a digital portfolio. I mean, you have to have something. I have YouTube videos that are unlisted that I link up and I will shoot out. I just got a job. I'm blessed to be working at Stagg High School next year. I'm making another transfer, which is it's interesting. It's hard here in Illinois, in the United States, to actually move schools. And I think that's bad. We need to make that easier, because I get to now see so many different cultures of different things like that. So I think that's a plus. Some people see that as a negative. But I think there needs to be that portfolio. There needs to be something digital showing what you've done, something that you create. I just don't know why. I guess, in entities that are so big, if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of thing happens. When I was going through my applications, they have not changed. And even some of the questions have not changed. And I apply every year just to keep myself kind of in the game of what an educator looks like. And it hasn't changed in the last 5 to 10 years. It's the exact same thing. And
that's some examples of the questions. I'm so curious now. Give us some examples of the questions that you see on the application.
The questions are like, what makes a great teacher? How do you use technology in the classroom? We shouldn't even have to ask these questions. Like, show me, right? Like, show me what you've done. Should technology, and the canned answer is always, well, technology is a tool. It's not the main thing. Well, we all know that, duh, right? Like, and if somebody actually thinks technology is just that's somebody who you're trying to change, who's been in education for 10, 15, 20 years, because they have gone from the sit and get to somebody's got something in their hands that is now more entertaining than you and actually can teach them more than you. So that it's funny, the questions that people are asking on the applications are, to me, it seems like it's for an older teacher, a seasoned teacher who is actually going through change, which is okay. I don't want to throw out that teacher. I don't want to throw out the entire system. I think there's a lot that we can learn and adapt, because we need that lens. But I think, I can't tell you why. There were a few where they do starting to do online things like this, where you have to do a video answering to a question. Man, I would just love to have like teachers come in and, teach for a week, or just do one project, or be a guest educator and have schools try to figure that out, and see what they can create. Like, I don't know. It's insane. I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know why they still do it, but I think it has a negative effect on.
Totally. I think because they are used to doing that,
Yes.
they just don't want to. It's just a habit, right? We create habit, and then habit create us. We're creators of our own creation, and then we get used to it, and then this has been working. Why bother to change? Yeah, exactly. I just love. I tell my own students, we are in today's show me economy, because guess what? I have worked and hired people who look amazing on resume, like, wow, every single part, amazing speaker, blah, blah, blah. But in real life, they are a disaster to work with. I'm like, lesson learned, right? So next time I can't tell, like, I can't say how important it is to actually have a digital portfolio to actually show like how good you are, what you can do. So I love how you mentioned that. Yeah.
I think teachers should have their own websites. Like I have my own website, and it's not all about teaching. It's about, my blog and all these different things, right? And not that mine's perfect. I got a whole story on that. But yeah, it's peterhostrawser.com. And it's not perfect. Let me give you a quick story about when I started that. So I started on Weebly, and actually one of my previous students is actually helping me with Webflow. He's actually built it. His name is Dan Bevan. You can look him up. He's a great web designer, self-taught, never went to college for a couple of weeks actually. But then, and it just wasn't for him. And he started building websites, and he's doing a great job. He's here in Chicago. When I first started creating my own, I just jumped into Weebly, and I'm like, well, what is this? This is easy. And I had, the Disrupt education and everything. And one of my old buddies from college, he sent me a message on LinkedIn, and he was like, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you spelled disrupt wrong. And I'm like, this is my first go-getter. I'm like, yes, I'm going to disrupt. I'm going to change this whole system. Let's go, because I was ignorant enough to think that I could do it all myself. So I looked frantically through my website, and I tell this story to my students when they're building their portfolio. And I'm like, I'm 2 weeks in, this thing has been published. I'm telling everybody I'm doing disrupt education. Good for me. And I'm looking everywhere. I got a couple blogs. I can't find it. And I'm like, finally, I hit the home page, and I'm like, where is this? And boom, right in the front, it says Disrupt, Distrupt. It is spelled incorrect on the front. And I had a choice to make. And that choice was, I can crawl under a rock and just kind of, be safe, or I can change it and move on. And that's what I did. And I think that is what I'm telling you, I tell all my students, I tell everybody this, because that happens to everybody. It won't be perfect when you put it out there. So yeah.
Totally. That's why I love bring learning to the public place, and you have that validation, you have that feedback, because eventually, guess what? You have to leave the classroom. You have to feel real life feedback from real people, not just very well overly protected environment. And I'm like, I put myself out a lot, and probably everyone in the live audience has see typos on this post and that, and I just fix it and then move on. Exactly.
Yeah,
learn from that. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. And so I see this. There was a quite comment I thought was really interesting from Alice. She said that there is a stigma around teacher turnover. I'm not aware of that. Is that in like K-12? And do you feel that way, Peter? Or
well, I mean, you can look at this in several different lenses. It just depends on, what stigma you're talking about. I think in teacher turnover, if you see a school that's turning over teachers a lot, I think that you're identifying a school that doesn't have a good culture. I mean, or needs to build culture. In my opinion, it may be something else. It may be, obviously there's a lot of stress. There's not enough help going on. When we start talking about social emotional counseling and all these different things, or people get into teaching thinking that it's going to be something different. And then they're done with it. They're like, wait, these kids aren't learning, therefore this whole thing is stupid, which I don't think it is. I think that we have an opportunity as educators to actually learn with the system. I think, I've read a few books of people who have been in the system and just get burnt out, and that's okay. I don't think there's a problem with that, right? Like people work work hard at something, and then if it's not for you, it's time to move on. That's fine. I think somebody who quits teaching, yeah, I think some people say if you quit teaching, you're giving up on the children. And it's like, no, actually, you're probably doing the kids a favor, because either you're going to go do something that you like, or maybe you're going to do something outside of the box of teaching and do like you, right? Like you're creating a lot more activities and things that actually push people further than the system. So, I haven't really heard too much about the stigma of people leaving. Some people will say, oh, this person is a disruptor, which I've heard. And actually, that's where disrupt education from. I had a boss at a few schools back say, well, you're kind of being disruptive. And I'm like, yeah, why? What's wrong with that? Right? This is how you learn. So
we have this, the best education. We celebrate being disruptive. That's kind of our family language now. They like, hey, mom, look, this drawing is disruptive. I was like, yes, I love disruptive innovation. So really interesting. I feel like, going back to what we kind of discussed a little bit earlier, which is labeling. I feel like people who don't fit into a traditional label, those people are more likely to be innovators and to make some changes, to be more courageous. And I don't know if you know the book, A students work for C students, B students work for the government. I think, there's certain degree to a great extent that is kind of true, right? Like you're more you don't really care so much about fitting in. You care more about, in my case, I left academia because I actually care about the students. I want to make a bigger difference, try to create a better learning environment. So I love this. Yeah. So
No, I feel like, I read a couple comments I think Pam put out there. They're disempowered by the standardized system, which is true. And if they feel like as an educator, if you feel like the walls are closing in on you, you got to go. Like you can't, you have to take care of you first, which I totally got. I love the underdog. I love the fact that what you said about, that student who isn't getting it. That's where I'm like, I call those students needles in haystacks, right? So, all right, you're special in a good way. We have conversations about the labeling of students. Like in here, what do you think people think about you? I'm like, I don't think about you that way. Tell me more, and that will open up a conversation with any student, especially at the secondary level and everything like that, because they're going to tell you, right? They're going to tell you, well, I don't like this and this, but here's what I want to do. And then boom, there you go. You just open the door, you use your network, you build, and you see amazing results. There's nothing in the world better than opening doors for people and helping others, because it not only helps you in a selfish way because you learn more, but man, just to see people grow. I mean, that's the essence of being an educator in any realm. Outside the system.
Yeah, and our discussion right now reminds me of this TED Talk I watched quite a few years ago. And this professor, he brought a few computers to a rural area in India. Yes. And the students, they don't even speak English. There was no teacher, but they figured everything out. So they have someone like a grandma figure, just showing up. Hey, good job. You are doing amazing. Just someone who shows up, truly believe in you and support you, they can just go figure it out. I really love this. One of my really favorite TED Talks. Shows children, they are so capable. What they need is someone as a coach, a facilitator, a positive influence, and be there. I believe in you. You can do this. Be their cheerleader. And so I love that. So we only have a few minutes left, and talk to us about college. This is something that we discuss a lot on the show, and now there are so many alternative schools, and I think some parents are changing, but most parents still feel like college is the only way for my children to make it in life. So what do you think about it? Do you think college is for everyone? And personally, do you think you will send your children to a college? And what's your take on that?
The straight answer is no. I don't think it's for everyone. The way I look at it is, okay, so there used to be, and I'm talking in the United States, there used to be college, there used to be trades or military, and those were your three things. There's this other fourth thing out there that's awesome, and that's the thing that I love to like dig into. I'm an underdog person. I see things like Crash, I see things like Lambda, Holberton, all these different places, and they're all starting to grow out of technology companies, right? So where you start to learn with people and you start to build with people. And it's very non-traditional, and actually you don't pay anything up front. There's percentages off the back end. It's messy. It freaks out, government educational agencies and all this stuff, because there's some bad ones, there's some good ones. But those three are the ones that I really like, have studied, and I've interviewed their people, Austin Allred and Sylvain Kalesh. I'm saying that terrible because he's French and he knows it. He's like, "You're from Indiana, aren't you?" But amazing. Isaac Morehouse, TK Coleman. So these guys, they're working on these things that are outside, and it's cost deferred. So I think as the education number goes up, the investment starts to go down. Now I know there's a lot of conversation on that. So for my own students and my own kids, what I would recommend is this. On number one, go into a career. I don't even like career, but a job that you think you want to go into before you go to a school for it. Okay, so if you want to be a physician, sweep floors, get yourself into somewhere in a medical field or something like that. If you want to be an engineer, you know what? Volunteer 2 weeks, walk around with an engineer, but you have to have a huge network to do this, or somebody who's going to be on your side in high school or even in your years after it. But dig in. Right? Get as much information before you plop the money down, right? The other thing is this. Understand, if you're going to go to a university, you need to know how to network. That is the most powerful thing, especially for big universities right now that they have, is you have to understand how to network. I didn't know how to do it. I made a mistake. I walked through school, got my undergrad, and then I was like, where's my job? And I never talked to anybody about it. I had my internship and different things like that. Actually, through my senior year, I got into my internship, and it was on radio. And I was like, I am going to make $10,000 a year doing this, and I really don't like it. I just went through all of this education. So I don't want people to make that mistake. College will work for a lot of people, and college is always going to be around. But I also encourage people, if you want to do things, and you want to do things faster, or if you're a self-learner, then go a different route, right? There's so many different places that you can find, especially like in technology. You can find a high five, low six-figure job, with 1 or 2 years of some sort of school that will do it online, and you create, or you can actually go different places again, like Holberton and Lambda and these schools where you're actually building to show your skill sets. I have talked with one of the largest commercial real estate HR directors in the United States, and he is walking through their hiring process and crossing off college. Like, I don't need that. And that's in real estate. He's like, I want to know if you can do the job that you're asked to do, and if you can move movement, and if you can show how to do that. A diploma isn't going to prove that. But I will say that college is for some, and if you have to go through it, right? But get experience while you're in college. Get a bunch of experience, but you have to understand that network, and then work, get out there into the real world as much as possible, and dig in.
Oh my God, every point you pretty much finish my sentences. So true. Yeah. I truly believe, the best education happens outside the classroom, and students, they need to practice and learn how to do face-to-face networking, and also digital networking, connecting with people on LinkedIn, different platforms. And I say, be a professional stalker, and how you cultivate those professional connections. So important. Oh, so important. Like, my major was actually in public relations when I was doing my master's degree, but I never actually talked to anyone in PR. I wish I had this conversation
Yeah.
Like, 20 years ago when I was in school, I wish I had a conversation with a real PR practitioner, but I didn't. So that's why with my own school, I really make an effort to bring in professionals so students can actually have a conversation with people who are actually doing this in real life. So they know, can you imagine going through this after 4 years of, 10 years, so much money? They're like, this is not what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah. So, there's some great things. Kimberly Freeman asked a couple of questions, are just skill set, right? Understanding what your skills are. What are skills that are needed, and how can you actually show those skills? We need to be doing that in high school. We need to be teaching students what skills are. Skills used to be a bad word. It's like you pick up a hammer and drive a nail and there's a skill, right? But no, like there's so many soft skills, these conversation skills, like you're saying in PR, and these skill sets, that's what should be built off of. So District 87, where I used to teach, I just stepped down from there and I'm going to a different school. They started creating a profile of a graduate, which I think is a step in the right direction. They have, diversity and inclusion. How do you communicate is actually one of these things. How do you independently think? I think there's just so many different skill sets that our students need to know. They have no idea. If they create something like on an Instagram, they're like, oh, that's cool. But do you understand people are actually paying for that? So that's the piece. Another question was, what were the alternative schools? Lambda. So if you look up Lambda, you look up Holberton.
I can send that links, yeah.
And Praxis or Discover Praxis. Those are different ones that are evolving, but there are many, many out there.
Oh, I didn't know this myself. I was like doing research myself. I actually had a blog article on this. There are so many alternative schools, and which is really encouraging to see that parents and students are waking up. We believe, there are different ways to learn. So I want to share this. You were talking about, we were kind of talking about GPA, and there are quite a few studies like this showing that, GPA is actually inversely related to innovation and creativity. And when you think about it, actually makes so much sense, right? So I feel like that is something as educators and parents, especially policy decision makers, all those need to understand that so we can really broaden our spectrum when it comes to a student evaluation. I also love this comment from Pam. There are now so many new majors, new career paths, new professions that we need to think about. We don't need a 4-year college to be able to work in those fields. In fact, 4 years might be too long. By the time you graduate, no longer relevant. Yeah, so I love that. Yeah,
I think some of the hiring businesses also are understanding that the students coming out of them they have a humongous debt on their back, and they will jump at a $5,000 or $500 raise to leave. And they won't build into the culture of your business. I think that corporate America is starting to get this because, oh, wait, I got another $1,000 that I can throw back into my college loan. Mm-hmm. And even if the business isn't the greatest for them, that's what I think a big complaint for these companies are. These kids are jumping around. Well, can you blame them? They have hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt on their back. They're trying to pay that off as quick as possible, and they're afraid that they're never going to pay that off. And I think that's one thing that corporate America is really starting to figure out. They're like, wait a minute, like what if we remove that? Someone will pay, like some will pay for the college tuition, but there's so many interesting things that businesses are realizing how to actually keep people in a culture of a business for more than 3 to 5 years. That's a win right now for corporations.
Yeah, totally. It just reminds me of, I think last time I checked, at least like 15 organizations, companies in the US, they no longer look at required degrees. And even Elon Musk, he recently tweeted, I don't need a PhD. I don't even care if you have a high school degree or not, but I do care if you have this or that. Very interesting. Yeah. So we are wrapping this up. What an amazing conversation, Peter. This is really amazing. And everyone loved it. So share with us, I have been sharing your social media handles, your website. So share with us again, and where can people learn more about you and connect with you and everything? Yeah.
So the easiest way is peterhostrawser.com. That has everything there, or disrupteducation.co. And I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, at Peter Hostrawser. So you'll find all that there. And reach out. My email, I even have my cell phone number. I'm like, just text me, whatever, let's go. Anybody who's interested in, working with me around education, just building different platforms, testing. I think schools need more research and development inside each school. And that is something that I think that's number one. And number two, I think that I really believe that schools really need to start to rate themselves on something different than their GPAs and their SAT scores, right? I think there needs to be a transfer there. But that's who I am, and yeah, I'm humbled. Thank you so much.
I'm having so much fun. I enjoy talk about this clever. So I love and I really enjoy our conversation, especially with a fellow disruptive educator. So thank you so much for joining us live. And thank you so much, everyone in the live audience from all over the globe, for joining us live for another episode. So I hope to see you again next Friday or Saturday for some of you. The same time, same location, and enjoy your weekend. And thank you so much again, Peter. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.